Welcome to Inside Outside Innovation, episode 104. Shane Snow has background as both a journalist and entrepreneur. He talked with Brian about his new book, Dream Teams, Working Together Without Falling Apart, which is all about how to form a successful combination of familiarity and uncomfortability that gets things done that haven't been done before. Find out more at shanesnow.com. Inside Outside Innovation is hosted by Brian Ardinger, founder of Next, a provider of research, events, and consulting services that helps innovators and entrepreneurs build better products, launch new ideas, and compete in a world of change and disruption. Find out more at next.co. That's nxxt.co.
So I grew up in a small town in Idaho, in the middle of the desert, sagebrush as far as the eye can see. That's sort of a, like a dramatic way of putting it. But I grew up in the desert of southeast Idaho, and my father was an engineer who was working at a nuclear test facility, which was in the middle of the said desert. So I grew up in this very interesting sort of rural community, farmers and hard work and good people, but this father who was teaching me about science and was always tearing apart car engines and showing me how to put them back together. And so I kind of grew up with this, this sort of ingrained thing, this curiosity and habit of wanting to take things apart, see how they work, and put them back together. And also with my dad, fixed a lot of things in very clever ways. And he was sort of this, like an engineer who's good at solving problems and hacking things. And so when I grew up, I decided that I really wanted to write about science and business. I wanted to be a journalist. And I'd also kind of survived by doing little web businesses. I also had a bit of an entrepreneurial bend to my personality. And I think both things sort of stem from this kind of inventor thing that my dad instilled in me. And so when I became a journalist, I saw kind of my role really and my job as exploring, asking questions, deconstructing things, and then and putting them back together and teaching people about them. And that's basically lends itself really well to covering innovation, technology, science, and economics as a journalist. And I got kind of fascinated specifically with with human behavior and how psychology and neuroscience in particular explain kind of why we do the things we do and why we think the way we think and how we can think different. And so that led me to write a couple books, and the latest one, Dream Teams, is sort of a capstone of all of that work. It's about the idea that the way that innovation happens and breakthroughs in history always tend to happen because someone has thought differently, and that almost always involves a group of people who are combining their different brains to do something amazing, or someone who is tapping into a lot of other people's work in very different fields to make something new. And so Dream Teams is an exploration of that, incredible teams in history, and kind of the science behind how they tick and why usually we don't quite add up to the promise when we're working together. Working together is hard, and it can be amazing, but usually it's just hard.
Definitely. I mean, if you think about it, it's probably one of the most vexing things for organizations to really figure out. It's easy as a solo entrepreneur to figure things out and do things by yourself, but as soon as you add that second person, things can sometimes crumble. And I think it's one of probably the number one reason why early stage startups teams and that fail is because there's a team dynamic that doesn't quite work out. So let's dive into the book a little bit. So you tell a lot of different stories and a lot of kind of case examples in that you've come upon. And it seems to be almost contradictory to a lot of the stuff that we've seen in other team building type of books. So talk the audience through a little bit about what did you see or what did you find in your research that's different than what they might have typically seen in other team building types of books.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of things that I found that either we've conflated and gotten wrong when it comes to common wisdom about teamwork, or that new psychology research actually shows us we've just been wrong about. So, and and we're always learning, and I'm glad that we are. But there's a few things that jump out in terms of the common wisdom that we all take for granted. One of those is frankly, two heads are better than one. Turns out that's not true.
Mm.
Two heads are only better than one if those heads are different enough and if they combine in the right ways. A group of people that all think pretty similarly are only going to be as smart as the smartest person. But a group of people that think differently, they have the potential to be smarter, but the way that you unlock that potential is it speaks to another sort of myth that we have about around teamwork, which is we for many years we've talked about how basically this comes from the 1970s from research that psychologists did. Basically, if you want to be happy at work, you want to be the most comfortable, the most happy, it pays to work with people who have very similar personalities to you. That's when you're the happiest at work, when you're with people who are sort of your clique. And out of this was born this concept of culture fit that we've hung on to for many years, that it turns out that when you really scrutinize it, culture fit is actually the enemy of innovation. And happiness is nice, but happiness is not correlated with problem solving.
Right.
And in fact, a lot of times when you're happy because you're working with people who are just like you devolve into this trap of, your heads are not better than one. You're just as smart as whoever's the smartest in the room, and you're not pushing each other. In fact, the discomfort, the cognitive friction that comes from different points of view smashing together is actually what makes a group move forward together. But then the other thing that is sort of a common misconception is that that fighting is bad. And my sort of new favorite quote to talk about this is when you want to make progress in a relationship, whether it's a work relationship or any relationship, it's not about getting along. It's about not getting along well. So if you can actually have the debates and the clash of ideas and do that in a way that doesn't get personal and that always stays sort of focused on pushing the party forward, that's the ultimate recipe. And a lot of times at work we aim for unity, and we aim for kind of cohesiveness and making sure that people feel comfortable.
Right.
And there's certain types of discomfort that we don't want at work because they are detrimental and they're personal or they're illegal or harassing or whatever. But the discomfort that comes with disagreeing or with having different points of view is actually very, very helpful. That's the thing you want. And then the other thing that sort of jumps out when it comes to common myths, and there's a whole bunch, but the other one that's the big one that I'm really personally very big on since this book is our notion of what a leader should be, a great team leader, team captain. We tend to think of them as someone who's very sort of stoic and strong and can take the punches and the bullets and the first one out to battle, that sort of thing. And they're inspiring in part because they're unflinching. It turns out that the kind of leaders that you want, the best leaders of the most amazing teams in history, are the ones that, yes, they can inspire you. They can help you understand the purpose and the story of what this all means, so you can rally around that. But they first of all, they allow you the freedom to be who you want to be and to work how you want to work in exchange for the accountability for the team. But they also tend to be very flexible. They're stubborn on that purpose, but they're willing to revise their viewpoint when it turns out you need to. They're willing to respect other viewpoints, invite dissent, not sort of crush dissent. You get a lot of leaders, they'll do that. They crush the dissent because it makes them look like not a leader. The best leaders will invite it. They'll say, "Push me, tell me what I don't know, tell me what's wrong," and they separate their ego from their need to be right. And that's the difference between a good leader and an amazing leader when it comes to teamwork. And yet we still, surveys show that we're more likely to promote someone or to vote for someone who looks like that sort of tough leader that can kind of handle anything, whereas the leaders that we need, and there's a recent survey by Fortune 500 CEOs that said, it asked them, what's the number one attribute of who you think the next generation of CEOs needs to have, and they all said creativity. That was the number one, that being able to do things that are risky, which is inherently kind of opposed to stoic, unflinchingness towards whatever. It's actually being willing to change and being flexible. That takes a lot of guts, I think, as a leader.
Well,
But that's what dream teams are made of.
And I think that's something that really has to, everybody has to be, I think, cognizant of that change in the worldview of where we're going. If you think about kind of the need for adaptability and nimbleness, and the fact that all these new technologies are happening and new business models and everything's kind of crashing in at the same time, how can employees, individuals, kind of become that more of an adaptable person, knowing that you're no longer going to be able to stay in your job for 20 years, let alone 20 minutes nowadays.
Yeah.
So how do we change? How do we adapt? And I'm curious to know how that will change how teams and that work together as well.
Yeah, well, I think the idea we talk about agile development and agile startups. I think agile leadership and agile teamwork is actually pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Just sort of connected a dot there as you're saying that. But yeah, I think if there's a couple of skills that we can all develop in order to be better collaborators and to be more innovative ourselves, one is filling our heads with knowledge across disciplines outside of just our own.
Right.
I think there's a huge advantage to, like, yes, specialize in what you're passionate about and what you're good at, but reserve some of your time and effort to explore things that are outside of your field, outside of your discipline, or to engage with people who are very different than you and have different expertises, because this is where creativity is basically you build up a database in your head of different things, and then you connect dots between them, right?
Right.
Same thing with people. You have a database of people, and you connect people and their ideas that haven't been connected before. So one, just giving ourselves the latitude and the excuse to explore a little bit more, to be more curious, to do that sort of thing. And the other is this thing called intellectual humility, which I think if there's one thing that everyone in the world could get better at, that would just change everything, business-wise and just community-wise, it would be intellectual humility, which is basically, it's like a fancy term for open-mindedness. It's what psychologists call respecting other viewpoints, not being overconfident intellectually, and being able to change your viewpoint. It's the thing that sits in the middle of gullibility on one extreme and stubbornness on the other extreme. It's being able to change but knowing when you shouldn't. And that's really hard, but there's things we can do that actually help us develop that. I mean, one is of course working with people who are different than you, and actually priming yourself to change your mind, saying things like, I could be wrong, but
Right.
before you make an argument, so that it protects it helps your ego feel less hurt when you are proven wrong. But there's also really interesting research that I ended up writing about in Dream Teams around how we've long suspected that traveling helps us to become more open-minded and more creative, and new research actually bears this out. But even better than traveling, go and live in a country or in a culture that is not your own for a few months, and it takes just 2-3 months of living somewhere else for people to actually score higher in intellectual humility, for your brains to start to train themselves that maybe it's okay for people to live one way and to live another way.
Yeah.
And as your brain forms those sort of neural pathways, then it becomes easier for you to say, well, maybe it's okay for someone to think one way and to think another way when it comes to solving problems. And I think it's extremely important to actually, we actually implemented this in my company. We offer people a sabbatical after they've been here a few years, where you have to go somewhere else for 2 months and do something that has nothing to do with your job here, and the only requirement is when you come back, you have to report back to the company about where you went and what you learned. And one guy took a train trip around America. One guy went to the desert and kind of went and meditated in the desert for 2 months. And Someone else, went to Japan, and it's like this. This is how you build that. You come back refreshed, also, but this is how you build those two things: that database of different experiences that you can connect dots, and the intellectual humility that helps make you a little bit better collaborator. And
Right.
there's other things you can do too, but these are the kinds of things expanding. Cognitive expansion basically is what it's about, and it's also really fun too, I guess I should add.
Well, I totally agree. I mean, you and I were talking right before we turned on the recorder here, but we just finished up our Inside Outside Innovation Summit, and one of the things I like about hosting that particular event is we bring together the corporates and the startups in the same room, and I joke it's the ties and the t-shirts and the tucked and the untucked in the same room, and see what magic happens when two fundamentally different types of groups come together, but yet they are both trying to do different innovative things. Sometimes within the organization, sometimes outside an organization. But the magic happens when you kind of put those different parts together and realize where the similarities are and where the differences are, and you can both learn from each other.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I love it. And I think, people need to be willing to mix and not just sort of stick with their tribe in those settings.
Right.
But one of the magical things about the human brain is when you learn someone else's story, especially if it's a story that, that is vulnerable and that you can relate to the emotions. Our brains actually generate signals and chemicals that make us care about people who are not like us. And so
Right.
you get a mix of suits and t-shirts in a room, and you give them a cocktail and you have them mix. And if they manage to talk about things outside of work, talk about who they are and where they're from and what they care about and what they've been through, then you start to develop real empathy that allows later on when you're working together, it allows you to have the hard conversations and not and still treat each other like people and still respect each other as human beings. And you can actually get further. You can have more sort of intellectual conflict when you get to know someone at that level, which is why sometimes we talk about offsites as cheesy things, and depending on what you do at the offsite, you can actually there's some science to this idea of getting people outside of their home environments. They're not
Mm-hmm.
attached to their identity as much, and get them to be vulnerable and and share their personal stories with each other, and that pays off in spades when those people then have to have a debate and they realize that they're very different things that they're bringing to the table are more powerful together, and hey, it's not personal because we love each other.
That wraps up another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. Thanks for listening. Find out more about our team at next.co. That's nxxt.co. Until next time, go out and innovate.